everybody! Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, is one of my fabulous co-hosts. My only one.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
Hey, fabulous co-host Diana. How are you doing?
Hey, fabulous Rob. Good.
If you're new to the show, you might realize that we're missing a co-host today. I wonder why that is. But really, this isn't a podcast about how many co-hosts we have on the show. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. And since this is being recorded in the month of May, it's going to be... Oh, you guys do it.
It's gonna be May.
It's going to be May. This month, we are highlighting articles written by people associated with the show. So rather than being our second super special co-host, we actually have a super special guest tonight. Dr. Jacqueline Mcdonald.
Oh, hey there, everyone out there in podcast land. You've never heard my voice before.
So, Jackie, you've been upgraded. I don't know. I guess I would say upgraded to special guest this week rather
I like
than.
It's like Economy Plus and Delta. I get more leg room.
It's great. It's the same recording, except you have a little more leg room. We stopped kicking you under the table because you're our special guest this week to talk about your special research in observational learning.
Cool.
I hope it is. You're the one who's doing most of the talking.
Wow.
Unlike most weeks where we just pick a topic and find some research related to it, this week...
At random.
Well, of interest. This week we're picking topics that had to have research published by one of us. And by one of us, I mean only Jackie or Diana, as I've never published anything
We're getting there.
of
We're
imports.
working on it.
We're getting there, Rob.
I know. This week we have Jackie as our special guest. Last week it was Diana. So, Jackie, I don't think we've ever done a tell us about yourself. There's one on the website. So if you go to abainsidetrack.com, you can see our faces, and we wrote some pithy comments about hey, look at us, we got a podcast going. But we've never actually had a full-length discussion about how you became a behavior analyst and your background and all that stuff. So I figured if we're not going to do it any other time, well, this would be the only time we would ever actually do it. So Why don't we do it now? Tell us all about yourself.
Well, I was born in 1980. I'm just kidding.
1981, actually.
No,
you were
actually,
born in 1980.
Bow wow.
I thought you were younger than us by more than a short amount of time.
Nope, it's because I act younger than you. No, I was born in 1980. I decided to go into this field after working with a family when I was an undergraduate. I actually was a floor time therapist first.
Cool.
Fun fact, confession. And as a floor time therapist, I went to a conference. I was very excited. It was my first real professional conference, and it was a floor time therapy conference. And Tristan Smith was talking there, which is so weird because he does behavior analysis. Well, he did behavior analysis. He was a huge leader in our field, and we're sad that he's gone. But yeah, so he was talking, and people were being so rude to him. They were throwing books at him and throwing their program guides.
Were they literally doing that?
Yes, literally throwing their program guides at the podium. It was so... I was like, where am I?
So
where adults are throwing things. And so at the end, he was in the back, and I went over and I was like, I don't know what happened there, but I'm real sorry that everyone threw books at you. And he's like, oh yeah, I expected that. It was weird that they invited me because I do this other thing called behavior analysis, which is based in science. And floor time and ABA are sometimes at odds with each other. And I was like, oh, and he's like, here, read this book. And it was I don't know, it was the Principles of Behavior book. It was a textbook. Mm-hmm. And I read it and I was like, ooh, I want to do this. And then I applied to grad school and I went to Northeastern through the New England Center for Children program. And then I got my doctorate at Western New England University. There it is. I like dogs.
And now you teach at Regis.
Thanks, Rob. Now I teach at Regis, and I like dogs and hiking and yoga.
And podcasting.
I'm so basic. Oh my god, I like...
And Starbucks.
Starbucks. But not pumpkin spice latte, guys.
Well.
I just found out what basic was, which is why I'm telling you that I'm so basic. Because I am.
Yeah, basic.
And I run with my friends. I guess that's basic, too.
Part of the qualification?
I think so.
Oh.
Someone told me that. They go running with your friends. I'm like, how else are you supposed to go at 5 a.m? You can't go by yourself.
Ooh.
It's dangerous.
But anyway, so that's me.
Great.
Yeah.
So how did you get interested in observational learning?
So
the most interesting chapter of your life.
Right. So, when you're getting a PhD, you have to do research. And I did not want to do behavior momentum, which we'll talk about. And
Our next week's
episode, I was like, I'm over this for a little bit. I need a break. And so I went into practicum one day, and I was with Dr. Rachel Thompson, and she's like, what are you going to do for your thesis or your dissertation? And I was like, I'm going to teach everyone how to do social skills. And she was like, you have a lot to learn. And I was like, what are you talking about? I can do everything. But you can't, right?
Right.
No, not well. I mean,
Not well. So I read like so many articles on social skills. So many. I have like
remember that.
5 binders. I used to
Mhm.
bring them to Panera, and the old lady used to look at me. She's still there, by the way, Diana.
Oh, yeah?
Still old, still sitting in that same spot.
Oh.
Yeah, it's great.
That's nice.
I went there the other day to see if she was still there. She was there every time we were there. I'm glad she's still old though, right? Because if she got younger, that would be weird.
Mhm.
And then I stumbled upon an article by Taylor and DeQuinzio that was recently published in 2012. It was about observational learning, and then I was like, oh, maybe I could do something like this. And then that's how it happened.
cool.
And then thousands of years later, it got published.
So you narrowed it down from all of social skills.
All the social
To
skills
us.
to one.
Just one
One
aspect.
skill.
That's
Excellent.
probably a smart decision.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
As our expert on observational learning, not to sell you short, Diana, but Jackie's
no,
a
I'm
special
not an
guest.
expert.
Okay.
I think y'all are experts.
I'm not. I just read these articles. I heard you give a talk on it once.
So you are an expert.
Oh, you know what? We should probably mention related to your research. You want an award
yeah.
about your observational learning.
Major award.
I bought a
major
bed.
award.
That's right.
I
you
bought my
did.
king-size bed with the
You
award
won
money.
the Babbitt Student Paper Award?
Yep,
that
in
right?
2014.
Yes.
Yep, before it was published.
Very cool. And you talked all about it. You did a very nice job. I was right there in the audience.
Right in the front row, and he was like,
Front
yeah,
row.
yeah.
Thumbs up.
Yeah. Anyway.
So you're super expert on the topic of observational learning. So, Jaggy, I'll be honest, when we said let's talk about observational learning, I said, what's the big deal? You watch things and you learn. That's all there is to it, right? That sounds like generalized imitation
It's just imitation.
or delayed imitation. Isn't that what it is?
Well, if you look at research from the 80s and 90s, you might say, yeah, that is what it is. But it's not.
But it's not.
So, Catania in 1998 really lays the groundwork of talking about observational learning as learning new responses that occur as a result of observing the responding of a model and the consequences that this responding produces. When I read that, I didn't feel like it was specific enough, right? Because I could still find some examples that it wouldn't absolutely demonstrate observational learning. So what we did is we made a new definition of observational learning, me and my advisor, Dr. Bill Ahearn, who was on the show, episode 35.
Yeah.
You may see him again. I know all the episodes
Talking
now.
about RIRD.
Yep. And so we described observational learning as differential responding based on the observed response and its corresponding consequence.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for something to truly be called observational learning, the observer must attend to the response under conditions that are likely going to produce reinforcing consequences and on the opportunity to observe responses occur when there isn't going to be reinforcing consequences. So it could be nothing, like a neutral consequence, or it could be punishing consequences, and then respond differentially based on that.
Mhm.
And that makes that distinction between observational learning and generalized imitation, right? So generalized imitation, as described by Bernbauer in 1976, was some imitative responses will occur following a model without a previous history of that response, but it's indiscriminate of the consequences, right? So
Yeah.
if I see Rob mow his lawn in springtime and he's doing a great job, right, I'm going to mow my lawn the next day the
Mhm.
exact same way, even if Rob accidentally rolled over his foot and cut it off.
That'd be bad.
Yeah, but right, so I would do it regardless of what the consequence. That was a really bad example, but you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
So observational learning requires 2 observations.
I
One
would say so.
in
Mhm.
which response is reinforced,
Right.
and one in which there's a response that's not reinforced.
Or that same response would not be reinforced. So in
Under
the future,
different conditions.
right.
Okay.
And so in the future, you're
Great.
more
So
you're going
you
to
don't mow your lawn in the snow.
right, that too.
Or you have to watch me putting gas in my mower and then mowing my lawn successfully, and then watch me not put gas in the mower and then watch me sit there banging at my mower, have it not go anywhere.
Sure, yeah. That could also be it too. Cuz you're doing the same response but it's under different stimulus situations.
And
yeah.
as we all know, mowing one's lawn is very reinforcing for men and women alike.
I wouldn't know.
It certainly is. I actually like mowing my lawn.
If
Hard though.
Yeah.
You
I
gotta-
thatch the lawn,
Me too. I do all of it.
which
but
is only I didn't know about thatching until I moved to New England. I think it has to do with the type of grass. that grows. Because here the grass dies underneath, you have to get it out
Mm.
in
Yeah.
the spring.
It's true.
Mm.
So that's where we came about. We wanted to make sure that in our study we were providing those opportunities so that we could empirically say, yes, this is observational learning and not imitation.
Okay.
Right? And in your clinical life, that may matter because you would want students to respond under conditions that are likely going to produce reinforcement, not under conditions that are likely going to produce punishment, or nothing, right? Or any neutral consequences. Yeah.
Yeah, and the main example, I think, of observational learning that was in some of the articles you shared, and then your article would have to do with the actual, when we think of like academic learning or
Right.
social skill learning,
Right.
the student will engage in this response when reinforced, when not. You're saying you might not need that. Ooh, sorry, Billy, that's not the word red. Sit down, you fool. They might not need that necessarily, but that would be important for
Right.
knowing,
If
the
it
difference
actually
between
is.
yeah, just the imitating
Right.
response and actually
Right.
the observational learning.
And you think like observational learning, the research suggests that it actually emerges as early as like 24 hours. There's really 2 weeks with like lip movements. Meltzoff in 77 said this. You see it more often, right, when with more complex skills in your typical educational setting, because it's not feasible for everyone to have a one-to-one, right? So the teacher can't attend to every single student for every single skill, and that's why we have group instruction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you see someone else receiving reinforcement for doing something or not receiving reinforcement
Right.
for doing that thing in a different context, right?
Right.
Like there's only sometimes you can talk out loud
Right.
in class or raise your hand or get up out of your seat, etc.
Right.
And so everyone doesn't need to contact those contingencies themselves necessarily. They can see others do
Right.
it and then kind of fall in line.
Right. And so we do say that this isn't a skill that is like innate, right? So it's a pretty complex generalized operant that is comprised of a variety of different skills, we think, right? So no one has empirically demonstrated that these are the specific skills that you need, but in the review paper that Taylor and DeQuinzio talk about, it's in 2012, they talk about some prerequisite skills such as attention to the model, generalized imitation in both motor and vocal, and demonstration of complex discrimination. That seems
that makes
reasonable.
sense.
Yeah.
And so that is where we started my study, is like, okay, well, what if we broke down observational learning as the dependent variable into these different prerequisite skills, taught the prerequisite skills, and then wanted to see what would happen in terms of generalization within classes and across classes.
Well, so, Jackie, before we get into your article itself, you shared with us articles that either you felt were kind of good representations of sort of the state of observational learning as of, around when you were doing your own research. So just for the listeners, I just wanted to share what those articles were. And I'll do yours last. It'll be last but most important for our purposes for
Just
today.
for today, right?
Just for today. So the articles that you suggested were Teaching Children with Autism to Discriminate the Reinforced and Non-Reinforced Responses of Others, Implications for Observational Learning by DeQuinzio and Taylor in 2015 Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. Observational Learning for Students Diagnosed with Autism, a review paper by Townley-Cochran, Leaf, Taubman, Leaf, McKecken, and that was in Review Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders 2015. And then, of course, the article we'll be spending most of our episode talking about, because we have the primary author here in the studio, Teaching Observational Learning to Children with Autism by Jackie and by Dr. Ahearn from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis 2015.
And if you're looking for it in Java, it does just say by Jackie.
Jackie.
McDonald
Jackie.
by MacDonald.
Jackie from ABA Inside Track. The funny one, not the smart one.
Which did not exist as of the time you
Right,
would have
that's
submitted this. So now that we know the articles that are good to discuss, or good to discuss at least in this context, Jackie, why don't we start with your article? So you had gone in, you'd said, I'm doing social skills. Out of all the social skills that there ever could be, observational learning was the one that jumped out at you. And there'd been some previous research, though not a crazy amount of research.
3.
Yeah.
3 studies. 2 of which were really amazing. 1 of which could have used some help. But 3 total studies using observational learning as the dependent variable. So there's a lot of work done on observational learning as an indirect method, right? So if you teach something to someone and then you look, oh, maybe they got it, but they didn't look. So that's not what
They didn't teach it.
They didn't teach observational learning as a skill. So there's only 3 studies to date. When I did my study, there's now 1 more. that we'll talk about after, the 2015 Taylor and DeQuinzio study that looked at observational learning as an operant. And that was like the dependent variable.
Now, was this because so many studies were sort of just looking at like, wow, observational learning, isn't it great and cool? And not taking into account, just because a lot of students are able to learn, or a lot of individuals are able to learn through observational learning, doesn't mean that it's a given that everyone learns this way. Certainly looking at children with autism, having a lot of the hypothesized prerequisites just not being being reflected in a lot of the deficits that you would see in an autism spectrum disorder.
Right. So that has been posited very early on, too. Varney and colleagues in 1979 suggested that children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder may not learn from watching others. But again, nobody really broke it down as a dependent variable. And it was more of this indirect skill. So they taught maybe other skills and then had them watch. And if they didn't learn, then they would teach those skills and then have them watch again to see if it emerged, but they didn't break it down as the skill that they're teaching in the articles.
So the difference between I'm just going to teach you how to do the responses that you seem to not have learned through observational learning versus I'm going to try to teach you skills that I think will allow you to engage in independent observational learning.
Right, yeah. Because technically it's not really observational learning if you've trained it, right? Observational learning really only is observational learning in those novel opportunities.
That's good stuff.
That makes sense.
Right?
No, it really does. And I see a lot of parallels here with the joint attention literature and the perspective-taking literature, too, because it's coming from a developmental perspective initially and then trying to kind of pull it over and break it down and provide an operant analysis of what's really going on here. And there is a difference between teaching the topography of the behavior and teaching the function of that skill and how you're going to be able to generalize that in a new setting. Yeah.
And another thing, so observational learning has been, a widely researched topic in the developmental literature. I mean, Bandura and his colleagues have made a lot.
Bobo
doll. That brought me back to undergrad psychology.
Yeah, so they've made some they've done widespread research on this. And a lot of it is great research, right? So we can look at it in terms of, we can reanalyze what they've done and what they found through the lens of behavior analysis. And I mean, it's still relevant, but the major difference between what Bandura states and what we state is he says that an operant analysis of behavior cannot capture observational learning because of that novel responding, because of that vicarious learning, that one trial learning that we would hope would come about when you're using observational learning. He says that operant, behavior analysis specifically, and the basic principles of behavior analysis can't account for observational learning. So he said that it's something that's inherent within the individual, and it's its own special category. But
what would you say to that?
I would say, so silly, Bandura. Of course we can.
Makes you feel any better. I think all anyone remembers Bandura for at this point is Bobo doll and the idea that humans are violent creatures and don't let them play video games because they'll kill each other. Bandura said so, even though that's not what he said.
That's not at all what he said. Yeah. But if I encourage you if you're ever interested in this topic, to go back and read those articles, especially the Bandura and Walters 1965, where they look at the differences between kids that saw a kid being reinforced for being bad, like punching someone, being like, "You're brave, you're so strong." Rocky was his name. I love that. And then a kid, receiving different types of contingencies, like how you're not kind, you're not a kind friend, and seeing what happens.
I feel like no one ever cites that.
They don't.
Reading that, I was like, wait a minute, yeah, this was more about the reinforcement, or so what was the response? And I feel the only time anyone cites Bandura is to discuss the idea that, well, when kids saw other kids punching a doll, then they punched the doll too. It's totally forgetting that was actually just one of the conditions being reviewed.
Yeah, and then the more interesting, I think, aspect of that, he teases apart the learning and performance piece, because he saw all the kids in the reinforcement group, right, that saw the kid punch someone. So they again punch someone, right? But in the punishment condition, right, where they scolded the kids, that's putative punishment, right? We don't actually know because he didn't do a punishment assessment. Those kids didn't respond the same way. But when the experimenter came in and said, "Hey, I have juice boxes and stickers and treats, and I want you to show me everything that you remember from watching the model," even the students that saw, didn't just display those skills in that room could do it when they were like juice boxes, right? So it's teasing apart like, yeah, I learned that, but I learned the discrimination of when to perform those skills and when not to. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Although
he'll do anything for a juice box.
I know, right?
They're really good. I kind of wish I had a juice box right now.
I think anyone that's interested in looking at these, these articles, like looking at the topic of observational learning, it's hard. I shouldn't have done it. I'm not gonna lie. It's a hard topic.
You shouldn't have done it.
I love it, and we're still working on research.
In retrospect,
it was super hard because nobody knows yet.
Everyone should feel a little bit that way about their dissertation.
Yeah, and we still don't know. Like even when we start reading these later articles that were published, we still don't know the mechanisms behind observational learning. So what we wanted to do was figure out how we could develop an assessment to test for the presence of observational learning. And then if it wasn't present, how could we teach that as a complex operant? Right?
Great.
So that's what we did.
And it was really easy, it sounds like.
So easy. Yep. Because it was a dissertation. We had 6 participants. And they had a wide range of ages, test scores on the PPVT. I got to do that for fun because I was like, all the other observational learning articles do the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. I'm going to do it too. It was so fun. I snuck into the SLP office late one night. I think that was the most fun for me, was seeing the variety of skills that each of our participants displayed and how everyone almost got there or got there in some form or another. Yeah, so our kids that we use in the study were not in typical educational settings at the time. They all had one-to-one support, but they all had a history with match to sample. So that's important. We did everything within the context of the participant's classroom. So we just went in, we assessed preference for our materials. So we tried to use things that were reinforcing for that specific individual at least. And the hardest part, I think, was trying to figure out our tasks.
Right?
Because
a lot of tasks.
And there was
a lot of variation.
Right? And there was nothing out there. So our goal was to be like, oh, we're going to teach observational learning. But I was like, we can't just teach one task because then we don't know.
Right.
And we can't just use one. So we have to think of all of these things. And I'm like, oh, and my advisor, although I love him, was no help. He was like, here, read this book.
That's why he's a good advisor.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm learning a lot for him because that's how you
figure it out.
It's how you do research, right? So
yep.
He's like, find this book from 1941. Good luck. This is the Miller and Dollard's 1941 social learning book. So I read that whole book. Found it on Amazon for $10, and I was so jazzed. Got it in the mail, and it was to Esther with love from Bob
Henry.
And so what we wanted to do was figure out, based on the literature, how we could use other tasks that other people had used on the previous literature with that they didn't look at observational learning as a dependent variable, and we wanted to arrange them from simple to complex, hypothetically, cool. Right? We didn't assess that, but we just assumed that a point response would be easier than a construction response.
Yep.
So you usually see observational learning in the previous literature around academic tasks and play tasks. So that's kind of where we started. Our first task actually was my favorite one. It was the hidden item task, and this was...
that's a great one.
Yeah, and this one is directly from the Millard and Dollard book, because they do this in the book. You just hide items, right? So you have a preferred item, a non-preferred item, and a neutral item based on preference assessments, and you just hide them under things. And you show them all the things under one box is the preferred item, under one box is the neutral item, and under one box is the not preferred item. And then you're like, okay, pick one box. And then they have to pick a box. The easiest one, you just have to point. And this is my favorite because when I was practicing for my proposal, I used Diana's oldest now. Yeah. He was young then, the only one at that point.
Maybe.
Yeah. No. Maybe. He wasn't. But it doesn't matter.
I don't know.
But he came into the room and I was videotaping because I didn't want to use my participants. And so I put 3 felt boxes that you can buy at Target. And there was a cup. There was nothing in one. And there was Skittles in one. And he loves Skittles. And I'm showing him. And I take the Skittles. And I'm like, look, there's Skittles. And he goes, can I eat one? I was like, I don't know. You have to pick a box. He's like, I love Skittles. It was really cute.
He was like 3.
Yeah, he was very little and very cute. But
if you would like to see him, he is currently featured on YouTube in
right.
At the time, it was the most watched video of preference assessments of a 2-item, or just all the 2-item and a multiple stimulus without replacement preference assessment.
When he was also 3.
Yeah.
It was a big year for him.
He was very big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We were doing a lot that year with him.
Oh, yeah.
And so we had 6 trials. Each box could have the systematic, item under it twice. And then we had green boxes, blue boxes, and plastic cups because I was a student. So you had solo cups, right? Wherever you were.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my
variations.
As my variations.
Yeah.
So they didn't vary a lot, but they varied a little bit. Mm. That was our easiest task. Our second task was similar to procedures by Becky McDonald, Shada Dixon, Meg Martineau, and Ahearn, where they did a computer game. And this was actually super hard to make for me because I programmed it myself and I use Visual Basic.
We know you're so good at that.
No, I'm not good. So I read the Visual Basic book by Dixon and colleagues and I programmed it in so that when the screen popped up, they could get points. And if they pushed on one button, a preferred video would pop up based on their preference assessment. And if they pushed the other button, nothing happened. And so I could have, in my hindsight, just done this so much easier in PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I stupidly did it Visual Basic wise. And I was like, no one ruin this computer. Because it took me 27 hours to do that easy. Because I'm not good with coding. And I was writing it in and crying and calling Nick Vanslow, if you guys remember him.
Episode 15.
Yep. So I was like, I need help. But so that I wouldn't recommend. I'd recommend doing PowerPoint if you were going to do that.
Super easy.
Because you just can hyperlink.
that
yep.
thing. Yeah.
After that, I'm like, why didn't someone stop me and tell me just use hyperlink, Jackie? Because that was a thing in 2012.
I don't know. Maybe I didn't know.
Nobody asked me, so I couldn't give you my advice.
That's true. I didn't ask you.
Nope.
Sorry.
Nobody asked Rob anything.
I didn't see you really a lot at that
asked
time.
You?
When was what year was that? That was 2012?
Yeah.
Talking about 2013?
2009 to 2012, basically.
Oh
2013.
no, we didn't see each other quite as frequently.
Not as much.
Yeah.
Not like now where I see you every day.
All the time.
Our third one was similar to procedures by Shonen Ogden and Orlov in 1995 and 1982, respectively, where they did an academic task, right? Mm-hmm. So this is what you would see, you have nonsense symbols, nonsense words, and this is the one that one of my former professors was in the audience when I was presenting this, and he started, shaking with laughter. And I was like, why are you laughing? I think I'm doing a good job. When I was presenting the student paper award. And afterwards, I went up to him. I was like, dude, did I suck? And he's like, no, one of your pictures looked like a penis. And I was like, it did not, but thank you. And I verified with the students at Regis. I was like, does this look like a penis? And they're like, no.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah, it's true. But that was funny. We did 6 sessions of that where there was yep, that's correct. That is zing. No, that's incorrect. Our fourth task, I know there's so many, guys. I'm so sorry. We're almost there.
No, this is my favorite part of any study.
Really?
It's the stimuli.
Oh, I was like, this part? I did it. I'm your favorite? But I'm not. I understand. Yeah. Oh, the stimuli.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah. So take all the time you need.
Okay.
Within reason.
Within reason, yeah. We only have an hour. Yeah. So then we had building toys. So this is where we get into our play tasks. Oh, we have our construction toys first. So this was very similar to that original Varney and al. Study of 1979, where I took toys and I broke them on purpose. Mm-hmm. So they did not work. So one of them, I Velcroed a boulder that was supposed to fall out into the construction thing.
I remember that one.
Glued it. It was, and kids would be like, what? And get so angry. So I had 2 toys of the same, and I was like, oh, watch me play with my toys. And one of them was super fun, and I made it very dramatic, where the boulder falls out, and it's so fun. And then the other one, it's broken, right? Yeah. And then the other 2 toys, I just took the batteries out after I was like, why am I being so dumb? Trying to super glue things into things. So I just took the batteries out, but they were not fun without the batteries.
Yeah.
And I would engage in the response and see if they would choose the correct toy, right? Yeah. The toy that provided the reinforcing consequences. And then the hardest task was our building toys task. So we had 2 baggies full of like little toys. Cookie Man, Lego toy.
Cookie Man?
Cookie Monster. That's funny.
Is it like the off-brand?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was like, what? It's like a guy that looks like a cookie? Or...
That's awesome. Nope, you're right. It's Cookie Monster.
Was it the one that had like a Cookie Monster head and then you squeeze it and it would like make a sound?
No, it didn't make sound. It didn't make sound, but it was a Lego. It was like a preschool Lego piece. So they had like the bottoms. Yeah. They had the feet, the body, and then the head, and then a hat.
Okay, so 4 pieces.
4 pieces. So I had an Elmo toy, an Elmo toy, Cookie Man monster toy, and Thomas. Rob's been making fun of me for this. Thomas the Tank toy, but I guess I should have said Thomas the Tank Engine.
Thomas the Tank sounds like a military industrial complex toy, as opposed to the train, the beloved train.
That's so funny. But anyway,
that's how you talk though. So when I read it, I was like, "Oh, it's Jackie wrote this article."
I like not
Cookie Man, Thomas the Tank.
I'm not well versed in these toys yet. They were based on the preference of the student. And so we used a multiple probe design across participants to demonstrate functional control. And we used a multiple probe design within participants across observational last task variations to look at the training over responding and to assess generalization. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
That's the kind of thing where you wanted to see generalization within category.
So we
but not across categories.
Well, we wanted to see it both, right? Mm-hmm. Clinically, if you see it across both, like that's amazing, right? Because you've actually, if you see it across both, if you see it across all of them, you're like
across category,
across categories,
and within category.
You're like swear word. Mm-hmm. I've taught the generalized operand,
right?
But
which is the goal.
But as a researcher, you're like, now I have no functional control,
right?
Mm. Yeah. So ideally, we'd want to see a little bit. We'd want to see generalization within tasks, and maybe towards the end.
Yeah.
Right? So we could see at least a little bit. Yeah. A little bit. Oh, I have to train this task. I have to train this task. But then I see everything. So that would be ideal. Mm-hmm. But that's not what we got. Clinically, you'd want to you teach one. You're like, oh, now they have these skills. And now they can do it.
Yep.
But that's also.
But that's why you have so many.
Right.
Categories and then variations within the categories.
Yeah. And also previous research wouldn't have predicted that, as long as you teach like one response, you'll see generalization across all the different variations and all the different tasks. So you weren't expecting to see that.
I wasn't, no. And no one ever specifically said that. But in one of the studies, it was Rothstein in 2007, actually, they suggested that the students could demonstrate observational learning on the playground and in social situations, but not in the academic situation. So that, I think, is one where I was like, where it came across that, maybe I should do like lots of them.
Yeah. And that would make sense because when you think of observational learning, we usually, again, we think of it across the academic tasks as that being the most important, but there are many, many responses that one could learn to engage in, and some of them are just going to be more reinforcing, therefore probably more reason to attend, more reason to pay attention to the conditional discrimination, and then more reason to engage in the imitation of the response itself.
Right. Yeah. And so I am, if you're reading along with you.
Turn the page now.
Ding! But you should go to page 807 in the article because I have a flow chart. And turns out I'm in love with flowcharts now, and I've been recommending flowcharts for all of my graduate students, and they're like, ugh. And I was like, no, flowcharts are amazing.
They're good to read.
They're so good.
It's so nice to read a flowchart and feel like, all right, I read all these words. It's describing the procedure. Now I'm going to look at this flowchart, and it will help me remember what it is I'm reading because I have read a lot already. I am tired. I just need to get to the results, but I need to know what they did.
Right.
It's such a nice visual cue.
Yeah. So if it makes anyone feel better, when I first submitted this manuscript to Java, it did not have the flowchart, and it got rejected. If that makes you feel any better out there for people that get rejected, it was a rejection with an invitation to submit, with a lot of revisions, one of which was this flowchart. Looking back,
I love it.
I cried a whole bunch, I'm not gonna lie. And then I was like, I have to make a flowchart? And I was like so sad about it.
It sounds scary.
It does, but in retrospect, after reading it again after a couple years of not looking at it, I love myself this flowchart. Mm-hmm. And it really pieces it all together, right? So is
it printed just exactly as you made it? Or did they have to retype it? I'm just curious.
No, it's exactly as I made it.
Okay.
which is...
I always wonder about stuff like that.
No,
right?
this is it. This is my flowchart.
Cool.
I know it's my flowchart because there are some things on it that are not perfect. And now I'm like, I would have done that differently. But
that's okay.
That's okay. It's just like arrow placements. Just stupid. But
that stuff's hard to get right.
Yeah. So we did a pre-assessment of all 5 tasks. If there wasn't 100% for one task or across the task variance, we moved to training, and we really trained each skill specifically. So we trained attending to the model, and that just looked at like, look at me, and we made sure that the student like oriented their body toward us. They didn't have to like creepily stare at us, but they just had to like give us a brief glance, but be orienting toward us. We trained imitation with that specific stimuli, so that's important. So I do it. It's only one thing. It's the correct one. I do it. They do it. We just make sure that they have that. And then we trained delayed imitation, so it was after 5 seconds. If I was going to do this again, I would do it after much longer.
Yeah.
But then I was just trying to be speedy, finish everything up. And then we call it consequence discrimination, where the Taylor and DeQuinzio called it complex discrimination. So discriminating then between. So our final training was exactly what the probe looks like. So you have the 2 items, right?
Yeah.
And you're going through it, and then I'm prompting the student to choose the correct materials based on the reinforcers. Yeah.
So pretty much the example of this is not how you would want to teach observational learning if this was all you planned to do for every single variation of every single task.
Because it would take forever.
Yeah.
Right? And then we did a post-assessment with those task variants to assess for generalization. And then if they did great on the task variants, we moved to the next task. And then whenever someone faltered, that's when we stopped and did training. Until we had all 5 tasks with all 15 task variants assessed.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a lot.
Whew. So that is one long procedure, Jackie. I want to get back to the results, but first, let's take a break. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back talking to our special guest, Dr. Jacqueline Mcdonald, about observational learning. But before we get into the results of Jackie's study, I just wanted to remind you listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to today's episode, you can apply for 1 Type 2 continuing education credit. You just need to go to the website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs, and put in your secret code words for this episode that we've sprinkled throughout. Here's the first of our secret code words. It is RED. R-E-D, like the color, not the verb. Red, R-E-D, like, I don't know, what are some red things? Like a robin?
Red rum.
Red rum, yep, you could do that.
Red hair, I have red hair.
Just like Jackie, red hair. Red planet Mars. All these things are red. Red.
Okay.
All right, Jackie, we're ready.
All right.
I want to hear these results.
So, first I'm going to talk about Figure 2. And Figure 2 is our overall assessment results. I think those are interesting because they show you that the participants, for the most part, They had some of the prerequisite skills in their repertoire already. So what this looks at is the number of tasks performed correctly across the pre-assessments 1, 2, and 3. And so in order for a task to be performed correctly, they had to perform all of the task variations correctly. So if you look, coming in, George was coming in strong, and he could perform task 1 and 2 correctly, and it seemed that no one could perform the 3, 4, and 5 correctly coming in, but everyone could point to, the hidden box and potentially do the computer game, and some of them could do the academic task because presumably they had a history of reinforcement in those situations, right? Mm-hmm. Pre-assessment, that was interesting that some could do some of the observational learning tasks, but not all of them, suggesting this notion that you do need to teach those prerequisite skills and it won't necessarily generalize across variations or more complex skills.
Now, did you choose the names Fred and George from Harry Potter?
No, because I, at that point, had never seen Harry Potter. But who are Fred and George?
They're
Ron Weasley's brothers who are twins.
Oh, so actually, these are all of the names that I would have named my children at the time, except for Sally and Brad.
Oh, okay.
So George, Fred, Emma, and Teddy were going to be my children.
Okay.
When I wasn't going to have children.
Oh.
And then,
so then you donated those names to research?
Yep, I donated them to research. And then Sally and Brad, I just thought were funny names. Like...
They are. They're like 50s, like sock hop football couple.
And they were my last 2 participants that I ran, and I imagined that they were dating, even though they obviously were not, right? And they didn't even know each other, but in my head...
Just the names.
Yeah.
The names were dating.
Yeah, the names were dating. And so that's why I picked those names. I want to highlight here one participant in particular, Fred. So in the pre-assessment, he actually demonstrated none of the tasks correctly. But once we trained one of the tasks, he got everything.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? It's amazing. And if you scroll down to page 810, you look, you can see the total training sessions required for each of the skills. And so for Fred, he required not a lot, like only 2 sessions of attending, 7 sessions of imitation, 1 session of delayed imitation, and 3 sessions of consequence discrimination. And then all of that emerged.
It's amazing.
Which is amazing / horrible.
Right. Yeah. Not good for research, but good for Fred.
So he was one of my first participants when I thought I was piloting this, and I was like, well, this does not work.
Right.
But everyone was so happy because then he started observing his peers in the classroom and actually differentially responding in circle time. And his mom had sent me an email and was like, oh my gosh, he's learning play skills from his sister. So whatever happened, I think it might have been that just booster training of...
Yeah.
all of those skills together. So it's clinically was amazing.
So Bandora was right. It was inside him all along.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was his mind file. He just needed to go find it.
Absolutely. It really was. No, I think he just needed those booster sessions, but that was not the case for anyone else.
Yeah.
But that was really nice. So most of the students in this study needed training for most, at least one of the variations. But we did see some. Actually, Sally and Brad had almost the same type of responding, which also made me happy because they were dating in my mind, right? The only thing I want to highlight, too, in Table 2 is that for Teddy, he required 40 sessions of imitation training, which was a lot in here, but not a lot in real life.
No.
Right? So if you think about it, when you look oh my gosh, that's so much more than everyone else. But then I'm like, well, usually people will teach imitation, right, as a skill, and they'll do it every day, 1 session a day, right? And it usually takes more than 40 days. So, in retrospect, these booster sessions felt like they took 1,000 years, but they really didn't in retrospect. And he was one of our lower functioning students, so I wasn't surprised. But yeah, so the figures they just took them directly could have also used some work.
I love the way you designed these.
Thanks, that was all Bill.
That's okay.
Yeah, but I'm going to give Bill Ahearn complete credit for this because we did it 1,000 ways. So this is the final graph, but I literally made 100 graphs depicting it in every possible way, with the training sessions in, without the training sessions in, across one variation, doing multiple baseline design across all of the variations. So I have one folder, and it's just filled with 500 sheets. looking at this all the way. But this seemed to make the most sense, and you could capture it. So for our graphs, what you're looking at is the correct performance of each task variation for one participant across tasks. So
for the tasks that needed training.
Right. So across the x-axis is sessions, and across the y-axis is the performance of correct variation. So there's only a 0, 1, 2, and 3, because those are the different task variations. And then each panel or leg of the multiple baseline design, I love it when people call it legs, was each task. And so sometimes that gets a little bit confusing. So if you're looking at George, for instance, we only trained 3 of the 5 tasks because he had already acquired 2 of the tasks before we did anything, right? So he'd already had those in his repertoire. But during baseline, he did not perform any of the academic tasks correctly. And then that little line, there's like a little horizontal line. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, I get those confused
like
sometimes.
Dash.
Dash. So the little dash represents the task that we trained. Right? So the little dash is next to the 1, so that we specifically trained task variation 1 of the academic task. And once he had acquired that, we assessed whether task variation 2 and 3 of the academic task was acquired without training. And it was for him, which is great. And then we went and assessed whether the construction task would also see that. We did not see that. He could not engage in that. But again, once we taught that one task variation, we saw generalization to untrained tasks for construction, but again, not to the building. So for George, we see similar results across tasks, that we saw generalization to untrained task variations, but not to new tasks. So for him, we can't really say that observational learning emerged for him, really, because we didn't see generalization across tasks. In that novel responding. We may see like a hint of it.
Right. Well, you saw it across
task variations.
Right. Variation of the same task, but not across different categories of task.
So we see it a little bit,
Yeah.
but not like, oh, now this is like he can discriminate different consequences across different variations.
Right. Like if he went in a classroom, you wouldn't expect him to
unless you taught
learn through observation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Fred is in that same figure, and we only taught task variation 1 of the building task. I don't remember why I started with that one. I think it was just easy because I didn't do it from simple to complex there like I had done it for everyone else. I can't remember why I did it, but I might have screwed up, which is highly likely. But it actually worked out nicely because once we trained that one task, we saw generalization to the untrained task and then saw everything else emerge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of an interesting point, though.
Right.
Right? So is it possible that teaching a more complex skill first could assist in generalization across categories to more simple tasks?
Right. So for Emma, we actually saw that. Yeah. So for Emma, I taught the construction task first and did not see generalization within that task. So I had to teach the task variant 1 and 2. Then I saw some generalization within that task, but did not see generalization to the computer game, which is actually hypothetically easier.
Yeah.
Right? But maybe it wasn't for her. But did see generalization to the building task, the building toys task, and to the hidden items. So we didn't have to train those 2 after we taught. So maybe the computer game, maybe she just had no history with button pressing.
Right. Yeah.
For Teddy, he's the one that we had to teach the most. We taught a lot of tasks with him. Once we taught 2 variations of the building task, all 3 variations of the construction task, and 1 variation of the academic task, and then we saw generalization to the computer games and to the hidden items. So those are the 2 easier ones.
What did the non-reinforced for the construction task look like?
The construction task, you couldn't build it.
Oh, it didn't have the right pieces?
Yeah, it had one of the pieces was missing. Okay. Yeah. And so this was one of the first attempts to develop an assessment for observational learning and then to try to teach it as the dependent variable by breaking it down into those component pieces. But we still don't know, like, if I only taught 1 of these, would observational learning emerge, or if I taught 2 of them, or if we have to teach that simple to complex or complex to more simple. We don't know any of that. So if anyone wants to do research on this, that would be super cool.
Yeah.
Call me. Call me. my numbers on Facebook, turns out. I think we took it down.
We took it down.
Yeah. So that's one of the limitations, is that
Yeah.
we don't really know, like, why it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really know if we have to spend all that time doing all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you got really cool results.
Yeah,
It's a really cool study.
Yeah, and a colleague of ours, well, not really a colleague, but I guess a friend/colleague of ours, replicated this in Connecticut with one of her students for an IEP goal, and she saw the same results. She saw generalized responding. Liz Nolte, if you guys know her, she's Dr. Liz Nolte now. She did that just clinically.
Okay.
That was one of her IEP goals.
Hmm.
So that was fun.
Great.
Yeah. But, I mean, a lot of people have been trying to work on observational learning, but it's hard. It's hard.
Really hard.
It's a hard skill, and it's hard to replicate even my study. So a couple of researchers have reached out to me in the past couple of years, and they're like, we can't seem to get your results. And I'm like, but some people have, some people haven't, but we still don't know, like, why.
Yeah.
And so this is an area that we really need to delve into and continue doing more research in.
Yeah. So, Jackie, would it now be a good time to discuss the DeQuinzio and Taylor 2015 article very briefly? We're going a little long, which is fine because you're our
guys.
guest. No, you're our guest. We want you to get to go long. But Quinzio and Taylor 2015 would be sort of another way to look at teaching observational learning. So
they assumed that attending to the model and imitation were already in the repertoires of their individuals, and they assessed that. And so what they were teaching, they extended a previous literature by Delgado and Greer in 2009, and so they were looking specifically at that final piece, that consequence discrimination piece. So similar to what I did, instead of just having the student just look on, I guess, they taught a response. So what they did was, in the presence of the reinforced response, so yeah, that's right, they taught the students how to imitate that response. And in the presence of the non-reinforced response, so when they said, no, I'm sorry, that's not right, they taught the participant to say, I don't know, which I think is so cool, right? And so when they did that, they wanted to see if observational learning would emerge. So those two responses, those two discriminated responses would emerge in the presence of untrained and novel stimuli, and they did for most cases.
Yeah.
Wow, elevator speech. Take that one
was
home.
Nice and quick.
But yeah, so I really like that. And how they taught it specifically was they gave the participants a rule. So the rule for getting it right was, yeah, you said what she said when she got it right. And when she said it wrong, say, I don't know when she gets it wrong. Mm-hmm. So that brings up a really important limitation of their study, is that if students don't display rule-governed behavior, this is going to be a really hard study to replicate with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So you might need to do a step back and maybe do my assessment and teach all of those skills, because you might not have that rule-governed behavior in their repertoire.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your participants, did any of them have rule-governed behavior? Not. You had no idea.
They did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
only I think one of them was vocal verbal.
So potentially you've got multiple ways that you would want to tackle the target of observational learning, dependent on what prerequisites the student already engaged with, or hypothesized prerequisites for observational learning. One for the students who have, some sort of rule-governed behavior in the repertoire, and ones for students who may not have that.
Yeah, and one of Diana's students right now is looking to replicate that study.
Yeah, we're working on it, and that piece is precisely one of the challenges, is trying to determine if they have that rule-governed behavior, and can say it's multiple pieces of responding that we're looking for from them. And we're trying to run it with some younger participants, and that was the limitation for them, is that they couldn't follow the rules that we needed them to in order to determine if they were learning observational learning in the way that we think it occurs.
Right.
Trying to parse out, not just can kids learn through observation, because we know that typically developing kids can and do learn this, but when you're trying to get at, what are the mechanisms that are really at play with observational learning, you're digging in really deep in a way that is interesting, but it's interesting from a research perspective. Right. So then you start to run into these types of challenges where perhaps kids are engaging in this covert behavior, but in order to get that from them, they need to follow all these rules in order to know what to state to us, right? And I think that that's just a limitation of the barrier of the skin to try to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah. So we're working on it. You'll see it at Babbitt.
Yeah,
this year.
She's getting some promising results, and it's cool stuff. But it's an extension of the DeQuinzio and Taylor.
Right. Cool.
So a couple different things to look at for observational learning. But like you said, Jackie, there's not a lot of, some follow-up research coming out, but not a lot that's been published since the 2015 studies.
No, it seems like, and I actually looked back too, because someone in my class asked me like, oh, what's new out there? And I was like, I'm just going to tell you that observational learning research goes in waves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like, 90s, it's like hot topic. And then it's like dead and dormant for a couple years. And then it like comes back again. In 2015 seemed to be a hot time.
Mm-hmm.
Hot time for observational learning, because all three of these articles were published in 2015.
By 3 different groups, too.
Yeah, by 3 different groups.
Surprising.
And then it's been relatively silent. And I know that people are working on, this line of research.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
And Taylor's group is continuing in
Taylor's
this line.
group, Kevin Lewazinski at Monroe Meyer has been trying to do some work. Sid Berkman's trying to do his dissertation on this. So there's people doing it. It's just,
Yeah.
It's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a complex behavior.
So why don't we move into Dissemination Station? So Diana, since Jackie's our guest, you probably should make the train noises this time.
Oh no, I want to.
Oh, okay. As our guest, you get to choose if you want to.
Yes.
I guess. Oh boy. And Jackie, when we were talking about how which articles you wanted to share, you mentioned the article by Townley, Cochran, Leaf, all those folks
et al.
You thought would be a very nice one to bring up now in the Dissemination Station rather than in the body of the episode.
Yeah, so I think that this is a review paper in observational learning, and I was actually super upset when I saw this come out because I had written a review paper that looked quite similar to their review paper, but I just didn't have my act together enough to revise it and submit it. When I saw this, someone's like, oh, look, there's an observational review paper. And I was like, why? No. And so I'm holding it. I have it still, mine. And I'm trying to figure out what I can do with it. But
why don't you just add whatever the new studies are and then be like, hey, it's an update to the review paper.
Maybe someday. But yeah, so it's a really nice review paper, kind of like solidifying the 3 components of the previous research, and then the research that's looking at observational learning as a dependent variable. And then they have a really nice summary of all the articles that if you want to do this is a good place to start, because then you have like a little reference section of all the relevant articles for observational learning that you should be reading. Mm-hmm. So that's why I really like this one. Mm-hmm. And they talk about some implications for clinicians, although brief.
And I think the sections that were the most kind of beefy were the ones related to, here's some research, here's the previous research, here are some directions for future research. And then, the clinical section was like you said, Jackie, kind of brief, sort of the idea of, well, we know some things that you can work on, so you should be kind of working on those and do some case studies. Let's see what we get from there, which I guess makes sense when there's not a lot of research out there. You're not going to be like, sorry, clinicians, I guess don't do this until someone publishes another paper. Right.
And a lot of the recommendations that they give for clinicians were recommendations given by DeQuinzio and Taylor in their 2012 review about providing students a lot of opportunities, to learn via observation, beef off that generalized imitative repertoire if they don't already have that. They do give us some good recommendations, but it's still, it's hard.
Well, just in the interest of making Dissemination Station as useful as possible for the practitioner, Jackie, I'm just going to ask you point blank. Hey, I'm a practitioner. I like the idea of observational learning, but I have no idea where to start. What would you recommend I do when working with students in the area of observational learning?
For me, I would recommend doing that assessment, right, to figure out what skills are there and what skills are not there. Because you may assume that a student has generalized imitative repertoire based on what you've done in discrete trial. But when you assess that in the natural environment, it may not be there at all, or for more complex tasks where you'd want to see observational learning occur. So I would do those assessments.
Similar to how you did in your study, just setting up simple opportunities.
Yeah. And obviously, as a clinician, I would not go as in depth as I did, right? Like, don't do that. You don't need that, right? So, but you will need multiple exemplars if you can get them, if that's what you care about, right? You may not care about that.
Maybe look at what are the variants and what are the tasks that are the most relevant for this student based on maybe IEP goals or parent request goals or
And then you could use a little bit of the DeQuinzio and Taylor 2015 article, and if you care about them saying I don't know, right? You could fuse that consequence discrimination condition where I'm training that. You could really focus on that if you think that it's really just about attending to those consequences. and work your way back if you think that all those other skills are there if you don't have time.
And you talked about delayed imitation too, in the DeQuinzio and Taylor, they had a 5-minute, I think it was 5-minute delay as well. So after they responded initially, then they waited 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think you would want
to again.
You would want to increase that time and not be like the quick time that I did. My downfall.
And if you had students who didn't engage in vocal verbal responses, would you recommend maybe looking at some of the breakdowns, more what you did, so looking specifically at the attending than the imitation and the delayed imitation?
I might, yeah, and I think I would at that point make sure that the responses I was requiring would not be vocal verbal, right? So it would have to be the action.
Yep.
So
the pointing and the
because
imitation.
You wouldn't want them to say I don't know if they don't have those types of responses in the repertoire.
But I love looking at these 2 articles and seeing all the different applications of observational learning. So very different populations that you were working with and that DeQuinzio and Taylor were working with, but it's applicable in both, and you were able to modify and find activities that could demonstrate observational learning in both, which I think is really cool. So this isn't a skill that is only reserved for students who are, integrated partially or fully or only vocal verbal students. It's the type of skill that almost any student could work on.
Right. And we were working on the 2015 article and my article at the same time. They did much quicker because they also got the 2012 article out and published, and then did this one, the 2015 article, out and published before I got mine. But
you were gluing boulders and stuff.
Yeah,
that takes time.
They're also skilled researchers, and I was just getting my feet wet. But I think it's helpful to have both too. And I had talked to them, and they had talked to me about what we were doing. And it's interesting that our procedures are very similar, right, with the discrimination training, but how we applied them was very different. So that's nice for clinicians too, right? You could use like this basic foundation and then go wherever you need to go with it.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly see observational learning as being important. Wow, big surprise. But I think for a lot of our specialized programs for children with autism, we usually are thinking about so much instruction as our one-to-one instruction because, the students have a hard time. They don't really learn from the environment very well. But just because a student learns best in a one-to-one environment doesn't mean that is going to be their instructional environment for the rest of their lives. Right. At some point, they need to be able to work in a small group or possibly even a large group. And if they're not able to engage in some of the prerequisites for observational learning, there is going to be periods of time in which they're in instructional settings where you're just sort of going, shrug, they're not going to learn anything for the next 30 to 40 minutes. But don't worry, we'll go back and teach this again later. Like, why? Wouldn't it be great if you could just use those 30 to 40 minutes to actually, provide meaningful instruction, then not have to reteach everything in the one-to-one environment? And considering most of the skills that are, were hypothesized to be needed for observational learning were ones that I would assume almost every student, if they don't already have them in their repertoire, would be engaging in learning of those responses.
One would hope.
Yeah,
right?
One would hope. And if they're not, hey, maybe they should be.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when I was talking to other people about this, when I had first published it, when they had reached out, is that they assumed that because someone had an imitative repertoire, that they had a delayed imitative repertoire, right? And so you can't really assume that, unfortunately. So,
what did the delayed imitation repertoire look like, or teaching procedure look like again? Because it's always one that...
Yeah, for me, it really was like, do this, and then I just hid the materials and waited for 5 seconds and then put them back up. But they did a better job, so they had like the 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? So that's actually representative of natural environment. I was just replicating Garcia 1976 and what they did.
But you may need to do that.
But it may differ depending on the population.
Right. No, 100%. You can't always start with 5 minutes. Yeah. Right? Like you might have to start with like 1 second.
Yep.
And then move your way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool, guys.
Wow.
I feel great. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Oh, it's so great to have you here.
It's great to have you.
I hope that you guys want me to come back.
Maybe. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see what the download numbers are for this episode, and maybe we'll call you back.
They're going to be low. I'm sorry for my voice, too. It's like a little phone operator-y.
That's okay.
I have a little bit of a cold.
It's okay.
They know your voice. Well, if this isn't someone's first episode, they've heard your voice before. Well, before we wrap up for tonight's episode, I just want to make sure that those of you interested in applying for CEs get that second secret code word, and it is a balloon, which luckily is written down because I don't think I could spell it otherwise. BALLOON, balloon. It's like a ball and an oon put together.
If you're a Pooh Bear, you might tie yourself to a balloon. drift up, pretending to be a rain cloud, so you can get some honey.
You certainly might do that.
Yummy in my tummy, honey.
That's the most sultry voice reading on poo I think I've ever heard.
Oh, bother.
Oh, bother.
All right, balloon. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. Jackie, thank you so much for being on the show. We hope you had a good time being here.
I did. I love being here. I'm going to come back again.
Oh, no.
Anytime.
Not again. Just kidding. Thank you, too, Diana, for being here as well.
Oh, sure.
And again, thanks to everyone out there who is listening to ABA Inside Track. If you like the show, why not subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also find us pretty much everywhere on social media as ABA Inside Track. You can find these episodes posted on YouTube, where they have the great YouTube closed caption function as well, if that's how you'd prefer to take your information from us. You can go to our website at abainsidetrack.com, where you can see the episode posts, you can read about previous guests we've had, and you can also apply for continuing education units. And of course, you can always email us at any time at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. Finally, thanks to Kyle Sturry for his interstitial music. We'll be back next week with another awesome episode about May, except you. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye.